over 1.6 billion total transactions, over 164 million unique user addresses, and over USD 5 billion in assets secured. Yes, today we are talking to Polygon, and I would like to extend a very warm welcome to Dan, Anurag, and Prabal to join us on this Halborn Flash video talk today. Introduce yourself to the audience a bit, and then we take it from the rest of the AMA.
Yeah, hi, I'm Anurag. I'm co-founder of Polygon. I currently look at like the Avail project as amongst a lot of other things at Polygon as well, and happy to be here today.
Awesome, great to meet you.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a product manager at Polygon, focusing on Avail. Very happy to be here.
Great.
Hi, I'm Prabal. I work as a researcher here at Polygon, taking a look into the tech side of Avail for now.
Great to have you guys on this chat today. So since we're here to talk about Avail, tell us, what is Avail all about?
So Avail is, a scalable data availability focused blockchain. Historically blockchains have been built using what we like to call a monolithic approach. And, in the future, we believe that blockchains will be built using a modular tech stack, of which, Avail is a fundamental part of how modular blockchains will work in the future, where we have, these three distinct layers of blockchain, which are data availability, settlement, execution, all of them operating on different layers, right? And as opposed to how it is, all of these work on the same layer, which is, like on Ethereum or Bitcoin or, as such, right? So Avail primarily is also a foundational data availability layer, but it is also comprising of the ecosystem of modular blockchains. So that's how I would want to introduce Avail. And in general, we believe that this is how future blockchains are going to be built out.
All right, that's very interesting and quite a cool approach to data in general. Where did this idea originate from? What was the inception story here?
So in general, back in 2019, when we were close to launching POS, our chain, which is there in production, we finally released it in 2020. But in 2019, we had we were already thinking of what to do after releasing the POS chain, and so of course we started building on Plasma in 2017 when we started Polygon, which was known as Matic Network before.
Yeah.
And so, Rollups, we thought Rollups would be where, the future is going to be, because, already by that time, a lot of things had at least been starting to be designed, right? If you think of Rollup, right, so it's primarily, and in general Plasma as well, you see that the execution layer is separated from the main settlement layer and the data availability layer, like Ethereum, right? So there's a separate execution and data availability layer in general. And so when we kind of projected of how this world will look in the future, we understood that execution, data availability, settlement, all will have to could become modular, and on the same time stuff like KZG polynomial commitments, which is a a core component of what it goes into Avail, that became a little bit more well understood and realistic in implementation. Mm-hmm. And that's how we kind of started this effort.
Okay, no, that's super
and Prabal,
interesting.
I mean, feel free to add if you want, Prabal and Dan.
Sure.
No, I think that's right on point. I think when you're looking at scalability solutions like L2s, data availability becomes a really important concern. And currently, rollups rely on the L1 for data availability, but that creates performance scalability difficulties. So when looking ahead at that problem, I think Polygon realized that data availability would have to become unbundled. And that, combined with new technologies like KCG polynomial commitments, made that a clear direction for the company to invest in.
Right.
And so Avail is the result of that effort.
Great, awesome. Yeah, absolutely love the abstraction and modular approach that you guys are taking. Of course, scalability becomes a huge add-on to all these efforts that you're doing. And you talk a lot about availability. That's what Avail is all about, I guess. How does that really differentiate from the idea of data storage?
This is a really important point that a lot of people confuse about Avail, because it's just hard to talk about because we kind of use the same words to mean both things. But data availability is a requirement for blockchains to operate correctly in the context of a scalability solution. It is crucial to have access to the data that was executed separately in order to be able to either compute the latest state or just to know that the execution happened correctly. And so that fact of data being available is the data availability problem, where if it's not available, it can result in a lot of issues. This is a very different problem from I want to store my MP3 somewhere and be able to play them in a year, right? So even though we're talking about data in both cases, like there's actually pretty different problems. So Avail is focused on this first problem of like blockchain correctness and execution. How can we design these solutions that will allow us to safely and scalably have these scalability solutions for blockchains? Yeah, I don't know, Anurag, Prabal, if you want to add some more to that.
Yeah, I mean, because of the very close naming, you know, like it's very easy to get confused between like data storage and availability. These are very, very different problems. So Avail does not do data storage, right? It does not solve data storage. Like systems like Filecoin or like other systems focus on that problem. We focus on the bringing data availability that goes into scaling blockchains. That's where Avail really shines.
Okay, yeah, I think that was all the nuance that was fairly clear. Yes, of course, Dan, please go on.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to maybe peek a little bit into the technology for like, just to give one example of the kinds of things that Avail does that are unrelated to storage, or maybe not unrelated, but specific about data availability. The Avail chain uses erasure coding and polynomial commitments so that a light client is able to know that data is available without downloading it. And this is a really important piece of the puzzle, where so a light client is a client that only has access to headers. And so usually in like say an Ethereum client, if you have a light client, you actually don't know for sure that data is available. You have to trust some other node to tell you like, oh yeah, like I have the data, right? Like the way to know that the data is available is you download the data, but then you have a full node. And so what we're enabling this other way for light clients to operate, where they're able to do random data sampling, and through these other technologies actually be quite certain, not 100%, but 99.99, as many nines as you want, percent sure that the data would actually be there if you were to try to download it. Right.
No, that definitely helped clarify the difference, especially to me. So thank you for sharing that little nuance over there. So I'm just wondering overall, where in the product life cycle is Avail at, and what are the next milestones you see around it?
Our next big use case that we're targeting is powering validiums. A validium is a kind of scalability construct that is somewhat similar to a rollup, but where the construct that is doing the execution actually does not post the data to the L1. In current Validium solutions, they post to a data availability committee, but these are usually small groups of computers, controlled by a relatively small group of entities. Instead, they can use Avail to store the data for the blockchain thus enabling a more secure and scalable Validium solution. We see that as our kind of first goal that we want to enable later this year. And then going from there, we are looking to enable this wider ecosystem that Anurag hinted at, where we can have, a bunch of different, very interesting constructs that become possible on the Avail chain.
Okay, awesome. And who do you think will be the first users of Avail? What's that profiling like for you?
Yeah, I think it would be these entities that want to create a Validium. So we think that a lot of current rollup operators may wish to have a Validium alternative to their rollup. Rollup costs are currently dominated by call data costs, which are essentially eliminated by using an off-chain data storage solution like Avail. So of course there are trade-offs, but we think that the value proposition is very clear for these first users. For Avail, our customers are other chains, right? So we're kind of a deep infrastructure solution, and so when we think about our user needs, we're actually thinking first about what do these blockchains need, then have that filter through to end users, through better scalability and performance and security.
I also wanted to point out, in the sense that, like with Avail, what we are trying to do is, like if you zoom out a little bit, right? Like, so what, what we are tackling the problem is, like, how do we spin up new chains, like at lower cost, but with high security, right? Like that's kind of the main goal that we're looking at. Like, so if you see, historically, like if you want to start a new chain or new blockchain, right? Like, so you need to kind of, let's assume a proof of stake kind of a model, right? Like, so you need to recruit validators at first, for example, like convince them to, like run validator nodes, like recruit a community, which is interested in your project, bring a token, for example, that the user community believes in, that will, and then you can use those tokens as incentives for these validators. And so it's a heavy lift, and lots of effort and capital required to spin up a new chain, right? Like, and that's how historically chains have been spun up, right? Like, so, and if you, with this approach, what we are primarily doing is, like we're looking at this problem of spinning up new chains and saying that, like you don't really need to come up with these validators for your new chain, right? Like Avail will be providing a foundational layer, which is the data availability layer plus, like chain infrastructure on top, which, and all this chain infrastructure on top, like uses Avail's security to power these chains, right? Like, so you can have, like once we have all this built out, right? Like you can actually spin up chains, like almost on demand, right? Like, and these will all share a high level of security by these new light clients, right? Like, and so we have very exciting plans in terms of, using ZKP, zero knowledge proof, for example, in terms of, like verifying, and so all that is coming. So in general, once all of this is fully built out, what will happen is the cost of spinning up this a new chain on this infrastructure will be far lower than what it is today, and that also means that like faster time to market for developers, like, and like better user experience, cheaper transactions as well for end users, right? Like, so it's like a multi-stage effort, but that's kind of the goal that we are aiming for.
Yeah, sounds like a core value proposition. And speaking of, like making transactions cheaper and spinning up chains and scaling them up, are there any chains in particular that you guys are excited to take Avail to?
I mean, as Dan said, right? Like, so what we believe is that, like once, right now the rollup development is still going on. Like there are a couple of good optimistic rollups in production, but we are still waiting for high quality ZK rollups to enter the market. Polygon themselves, we ourselves are working on, like a few of them. And, like in general, what we are, once these rollups get into production, the next construction that they will focus on having is basically a validium, right? Like, so, so there will be a ZK rollup, but there will be another instance of the same tech stack, but in a validium construction, which basically means instead of transaction data being put on Ethereum, which right now takes up 70 to 80% of a rollup cost, right? Like, so that can be put to Avail, and so you drastically reduce the transaction costs. So validiums are, like our first target, and like, so those we see, like ZK rollups themselves are just rolling out into production. We will see one of the first product into production, maybe end of this year or early next year, and that is when those validium constructions will also roll out pretty soon after that. So that's the kind of customers that we're looking at, and you can consider all the major rollups like as part of our base.
No, that's very interesting. So I imagine the Polygon rollups will also work with Avail at some point. That's
yes.
Okay. Great. Since we are getting this unique opportunity to talk to you guys from Polygon, I would love to ask you guys, do you think there is a common misconception out there about Polygon that you see all the time, and maybe you'd like to talk about that a bit?
I think if you see our product portfolio, it has got, like one of the strongest technical capabilities in terms of zero knowledge cryptography, like even just, like P2P networking, stack build out, for example, and various other innovations that we're doing on the node development, blockchain node development side, right? Like, and of course, like currently we are pretty much, like in development mode. The only public solution that we have at the moment is our POS chain, right? Like, so since a lot of this technological innovation is happening inside Polygon, right? Like, it's still not pretty well known to the outside world. We have started releasing some information regarding our ZK rollups, for example. But like I think like we have three of the best teams in the world in terms of like zero knowledge cryptography itself. Avail itself is a like a very innovative way to scale. But in general, this concept is pretty new and not very well understood, like by the wider space. So I think with time that will change, of course, once we like all of these solutions ship to production. So yeah, I mean, that's the only thing. But otherwise, like we are very happy with what's happening internally. We are very excited, actually. I mean, we have built such a strong team internally, and like from the days that like we were very scrappy when we started. Like, we started with a team of 3 back in 2017, and like we've come this far. And so, I mean, so we certainly no complaints, but like certainly like we are very excited to see what comes next.
Yeah, it's been a massive growth journey from there, and we're also super excited to keep tabs in the community and see where you guys expand to from here, right? All right, so we are Halborn, our business is security, and I have to ask you guys, what is your stand on security when it comes to Avail, and what plans do you have in place for that?
Yeah, in general, of course, I mean, security is very important in general for Web3 companies, and like, and we work with Halborn very closely, as well as other companies as well. In general, of course, from a OPSEC, from a code audit perspective, like we always try to kind of have multiple audit firms and checks in place. We have like a very big security team in-house, like led by Mudit Gupta at Polygon, like, and so there's a lot of strong focus on security in terms of, like operational and, like code audits and such. From a very generic perspective, I would say, like trying to tie our security goals into like from Avail and a ZK perspective, right? Like, so what we are doing with ZK, for example, is, like we're trying to replace or change the way blockchains are constructed, right? Like, so instead of validators running the blockchain, like ZKPs are, or ZK rollups are, like basically blockchains run by math, right? Like, so these are mathematical, like executions are, like proved mathematically rather than, like going through validators, right? Like, so that is like an indirectly, like you're reducing the attack surface for, like from a security perspective. Of course, I mean, ZKPs are pretty new. The code, all these are very new components. So you need, of course, like code audits and, like strong verification measures to put all in this place. But ultimately, I think what our stack, once we fully build this out, right, like overall, it will lead to a much safer and secure space for, like how blockchains are constructed.
Yeah, definitely. And what you said about, like ZK also securing it intrinsically is very true as well. Thank you again for shedding light on what Avail is all about. I definitely learned a lot from this conversation. And probably to end this, I would love to ask you specifically, Anurag, maybe, because I see that Polygon is moving from a carbon neutral to a carbon negative approach, which is pretty fantastic to see. Tell us a bit more about this initiative and efforts in general.
Yeah, I mean, this primarily, like the whole campaign, I mean, is pretty little bit educational in nature as well, in the sense because, like there are a lot of proponents. I mean, this is coming from a legacy POW narrative kind of a place where, like Ethereum and Bitcoin, for example, were working on POW, proof of work, for example, and, like burning electricity per se. I mean, of course, as you know, Ethereum has recently just shifted to POS, for example, right? Like, and so there was like this criticism coming our way in the sense that, like NFTs are not environmentally sensitive and, like, I mean, those kind of things. And so what we did internally is, kind of, we kind of took the opportunity to, like ensure that users are, like educated correctly in the sense what we provide as a company, right? Like, so like in general, our POS blockchain already runs on the POS, like proof of stake consensus, and therefore, like does not consume as much energy as, let's say, a proof of work blockchain. And in addition, we have partnered with a few ecosystem projects which are in the carbon credit space to ensure that, to first get to a carbon neutral stage and then slowly work towards like a carbon negative footprint, right? Like, so of course, it started from a very educational perspective. That's what I would say, but then has slowly, like moved towards the whole company being more, like carbon conscious, if I may.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that perspective and the story behind, also for joining us on this chat. To our viewers, if you have a question about Halborn and Avail or Polygon in general, feel free to drop in a comment and we'll make sure to get back to you. Thank you again, guys.